This in-person episode of 3 Food Memories with Ken Doan is with enormous gratitude to the team at the Ken Doan Gallery.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the ground we stand on and thank them for allowing Papa to tell stories on these glorious lands we share.
Hello and welcome to 3 Food Memories with me, Savva. For longer than I can poke a stick at, my company Plated has catered bloody delicious experiences for some of Australia's most extravagant and intimate soirees. Food connects us. It connects us to people, to places and to moments in time. These memories shape who we are and where we've come from. So come and break bread with my guests and I as they reveal far more about themselves than what they've tasted. In this episode of TFM, I find myself in a gallery studio within arm's reach of 3 Australian legends to talk 3 food memories. Since the 1980s, our guest's work has celebrated the colours and sights of Australia. His work frequently features boats, flowers, birds, but most significantly, a performing arts centre, a steel-through arch bridge. So intimate is the relationship with the said bridge and art centre, you could say they've become lifelong mates. Kenneth Stephen Doan AM's distinct style of painting has had people fall in love with it and him the world over. His designs have been featured on t-shirts, tea towels, duvet covers, high school textile projects, makeup bags, swimsuits and even golf balls. Awards, distinctions, fellowships and laureates stretch as far back as the mid-1960s for Ken's services to art, design, business, tourism, humanity, and essentially for imagery that captures optimism, the essence of Australian sensibility. Here with me now, at a wooden table covered in paint splashes, drips, sploshes, sits the man himself, now in his 80s, still moustached, eternally grateful, and steadfastly optimistic. Ken Doan, welcome to 3 Food Memories in your gallery studio.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
It's quite a privilege to be here and a very, very, very special place. When I was in Year 8, about the same age as you when you left school, part of our textiles and design curriculum, we had to run up some kimonos on the sewing machine. The majority of my schoolmates chose your signature prints. I was a bit up myself. I chose Jenny Key's fabrics, directional black and white designs with red-esque accents. When I think back to the kimonos of my peers, I know you didn't create these vibrant hues, but you took charge of these colours and gave them a very modern Australian aesthetic. Where did this inventiveness with colour come from?
I've always liked colour. Colour is just like musical notes. It's how you place one against the other. The colour has always been here in every Australian garden going back into the 40s. There'd be gerbras and pansies and marigolds and, all kinds of bright colours. It's just a matter of how you use them. Maybe, before I started to work, maybe there was a more subdued, beigey kind of look for Australia. In fact, one critic said that I took the beige out of Australia. That's far too grand a statement, but I appreciate it.
What was going on at that time when artists were using sort of low-tone colours?
Well, I guess we're talking about the 50s. Like, I was born in 1940, so I didn't know my dad until he came back from the war when I was 5. The 50s for Australia, I thought it was a terrific time. People look back and look back on it now and say that, not too much happened. I think a lot happened. It was the time of the first teenagers. In other words, 1955, I think. Bill Haley came out with Rock Around the Clock, and suddenly, we're all jumping around and dancing. And I was 14 when I went to, it's now called the National Art School. In those days, it was just called East Sydney Tech. I think I was the youngest student ever to go there. I'd passed the intermediate, which is the kind of minimum scholastic level you can get to. And my dad and we went down to the education department. Anyway, I got an exemption to leave school as I was going to continue my education at Eastern Tech. So it was a terrific time. I loved it.
Your father took you to the education department to get you into the school, as you said. What was his thoughts about you going to art school?
My father was an engineer. He'd been a bomber pilot during the war. Not that he talked too much about it, but his brain, I guess, is a much more mechanical one than I have no mechanical ability at all. But for him, he was very happy to support me, and throughout his entire life, he was extremely proud of me.
Let's start with your first food memory. It's lobster in melted butter in Nassau, Bahamas, after a Bacardi shoot.
That's exactly right. Like, I worked in London for a very big advertising agency called Jabler Thompson, and we had the Bacardi account. So we were going to do a deal with Coke, and I designed some ads that showed two people diving down to get a bottle of Bacardi or a bottle of Coke that was stuck in the top of a coral head. In those days, I'm very pleased that I was at the time when if you had an idea like that, you had to do it real. You had to make it happen. No computers. Nowadays, you could do it in a backyard in somebody's garage. So I designed these ads. Two people diving down to get a bottle of Bacardi stuck in the top of a coral head with lots of little fish swimming around it. And they said to me in London, "Can you do it?" I said, "I'm Australian. Of course I can do it." Well, the truth is, I'd never been scuba diving in my life. I'd been swimming and snorkeling. But Judy and I had not been very long married. Judy was very beautiful. So we went to take our diving certificate in a pool in a hotel in Regent's Park. It's called the White House Hotel, if I remember. So, armed with our diving certificates, we flew to Nassau. We hired a boat and a captain, big schooner, and we set off to find a coral head that was within maybe a metre of the surface, because you need to have the light coming through. Anyway, we were very unsuccessful in finding the location, and then a big storm came along. It lasted for about 3 days, a lot of junk and muck in the water, so you had to wait till that cleared. Anyway, we found a place near an oil refinery at the back of Nassau. And the only thing is, they said, look, at the end of this wharf, there's some coral heads. They're in the right position, but we often throw the garbage off the end of this pier or this wharf, and there could be some sharks around. So, I'm Australian, of course I'm scared of sharks. But to make it happen, you have to get a can of sardines, stick it in the coral head behind the bottle, stab it with a knife so that little bits of oil float up through the water, and that attracts the little bright fish. That's what I say. Nowadays with the computer you can place those fish perfectly, but in those times you had to do it for real. You had to make it happen. We did this shot. We went down for an hour in the tanks, but I knew that we didn't really quite have it, so I insisted, stupid me, that we go down and do another hour. Well, after about 40 minutes, the assistant ripped off his mask. We were in maybe 20, 30 meters of water, and tried to get up to the surface. He was obviously in a bad state, as was in the end the photographer. Judy and I kept diving down, doing our particular bit. Anyway, we eventually got the picture. We went straight back to the motel, quickly got our gear together, jumped on a plane, and then the deal was Judy and I had to go to Bermuda, where the Bacardi family lived, in a house called Bacardi on the Rocks, because we were processing the film at night in the motel. Makes a bit of a smell, but you can clear that up. So we get to Bermuda in the middle of the night. It's a very beautiful hotel there, big pink hotel. But Judy was having a lot of problem breathing. I called a doctor. By this time, it was about early Sunday morning, maybe 1 o'clock. And the doctor finally arrived, and I don't know why, it made me laugh when he walked in because he's wearing Bermuda shorts. Of course he's wearing Bermuda shorts. He's living in bloody Bermuda. Anyway, he clearly understood the problem and said that, in some good rest, you'd probably, get over it and not to do it again. So the next morning we went to the Bacardi family. We showed them a few clips. They liked them very much. We went back to London, and from that time onwards, I did a Bacardi film somewhere in the world every year. Portugal, even the Great Barrier Reef, Acapulco. But to get back to the food part of it, when we'd been shooting in Nassau before the storm, we hadn't had any food at all, and it was quite late. This is early in the shoot. We didn't have anything. So we went to a nightclub. They were dancing and steel bands, wonderful feeling, sort of outdoor feeling. And then we would arrive there, I suppose, past 11, getting on for midnight. And I said, look, if you've got we're really hungry. Have you got anything to eat? And they said, no, look, the kitchen's virtually closed up. There's nothing we could do. They said, oh, well, wait a minute. Look, we could do lobster and hot melted butter. How about that? Well, how about that would be, how about that sounds absolutely bloody fantastic. So I always like lobster, but I always remember that particular meal. Remember the tension of the day. It's suddenly solved by the wonderful feeling and taste of a Nassau lobster in hot melted butter.
You say even when I went to art school, I knew I needed to make money. Fast track when you started your young family, that came up for you again, knowing that you had to make money being a resource to support this young family. Where did this knowing come from?
Unless you are independently wealthy, which our family certainly was not, money has to come from somewhere. I had a number of businesses when I was a young boy. My first business was a manure business. I lived in Springwood. And I and another mate, we had a wheelbarrow, and he had a set of ball-bearing wheels, like, metal wheels. That's like currency in those days. And so we put his wheels on my clumsy old wheelbarrow, and I did a poster that on one side showed various animals, on the other side had the price that we could charge for manure. So on a Saturday morning, we would go out and basically look at animals, waiting for them to have a crap, really. I even had a category on there called wild, in case a lion escaped from Warragamba Lion Safari. You could charge a lot for that. And my target audience was essentially my mother and my auntie and the ladies next door, who I knew would be quite willing to buy my manure. So look, we did this for, I'd say 2 weeks before the whole business collapsed, because Michael arrived one day and wanted his wheels back. And so, the whole business collapsed, and I realized from then on, I have to be in control.
Your artwork, when I look at your work over the years, one of the things that comes to mind is the similarity between the Angry Penguins, Albert Tucker, Sidney Nolan, Arthur Boyd. I speak specifically to and of the rhythm in the paintbrushes. They were young fellows when you were at art school, weren't they? Did you ever meet them?
Yeah, no, I met Sidney Nolan a couple of times, and I own 3 fantastic Nolans. I met him once for the first time in the Northern Territory. I was there with a film crew. We were doing something, I don't know, family on holidays or something. And the sound recorder said, oh, look, just hold the sound for a minute, hold the shoot, because there's something out there. It was another filming group coming through. That actually turned out to be the late and infamous Rolf Harris. He was shooting something up there. Anyway, then we went back to the airport in Darwin to come back on the plane. And Sidney Nolan was there, and there were some people from the ABC with him that knew me, were kind enough to introduce me to Sidney Nolan. So we spoke for a while. Then the plane, when it landed in Alice Springs on the way back, he was sitting up the front, I was sitting down the back. We got out and we chatted again, and I did a drawing on the back of the boarding pass. It's called Nolan Flying Home, which was like the Kelly helmet with a very decorative tie coming out of it. I always liked to wear very decorative ties. Anyways, it was wonderful to meet him, to chat with him. About 3 weeks after that, I was in Canberra one day, and I thought I really should go out to Lanyon, which is the gallery that has the Nolan works. It's quite a narrow road through the bush, and so I drove out there, and then another car was coming the other way, so I sort of pulled over to let it go through, and it was Sidney Nolan and his wife. So we got out, chatted again about the surprise of doing it. He asked whether I would give the drawing to the Lanyon Gallery, which I did, and I guess it's somewhere down there in the archives, Nolan Flying Home.
The angry penguins are a big deal for me, so I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, talking about them. What did the angry penguins teach you as a young artist? Well,
I guess it was just about the act of painting. It wasn't an installation, it wasn't necessarily sculpture, it was the physical act of painting. I didn't delve too much into it, other than that some of the imagery I really liked. I mean, I always think that Nolan, a very, very, very inventive painter, very inventive mind, and so Albert Tucker and Joy Hester. But it was the physical act of making the mark. And I think in a very Australian way, if you compare it with kind of, French Impressionism, Monet and Bonnard, people that I absolutely love. But these were different. These were Australian paintings, Australian marks, a certain strength about them, certain freedom about them.
And how has that freedom been for you over the years? Has it changed?
Well, I would always like very much to paint like a 5-year-old. I mean, 5-year-olds are impossible to struggle. I mean, they go at it with no fear at all. If they want to paint an arm coming out of the top of your head, well, out of the top of your head. It's only when they get to about 8 or 9 that they realize the arm should come out of the shoulder, that the attitude to drawing and painting changes.
How does that make you feel?
Old. It makes me feel very old, actually.
Let's talk about the Vance Joy Commission. Vance Joy asked you to commission a piece of work for Taylor Swift on her recent Australian tour. Had you heard of Taylor Swift before?
No, I didn't know who she was at all. I'm still a bit into jazz or early rock and roll. But he got in touch with me and my PA and said, look, it's all very secretive. Somebody's going to come out here and we'd like to commission you to do a painting for it 'cause it's going to be her birthday. And so I said, okay, but you got to give them, it's got to be a considerable amount of money, and you got to give the money to UNICEF. Anyway, they agreed to that. I did the painting. It was a big painting of Sydney Harbour, kind of classic Ken Doane picture, with a wish you were here on it and happy birthday, her name up in lights on the bridge. And it's probably, in the dunny and it wouldn't be the dunny. It's probably in one of her houses somewhere. And look, she's an absolutely phenomenon, Taylor Swift. Yeah, I never got the chance to meet her, but there you are.
So Vance didn't just drop you a DM request for a canvas with the Steel Arch Bridge and some koalas bungee jumping down. He just said,
do what you like.
Do what you like.
Oh, yeah, look, I don't take any commissions, or very, very rarely. And if it is, it's got to be what I want to do, not what somebody else wants to do. I'll tell you, it's just been buying some pictures of mine is Jim Jeffries. Do you know Jim Jeffries?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Jim Jeffries, what a rude man. But what a funny man, too. And what a sensitive man. Now, he's been kind enough to buy quite a few pictures recently. I appreciate it very much.
Who else has Ken Doane in their collection?
Michael Parkinson, Billy Connolly, bits and pieces. Look, every picture, once it goes to somebody else, it has a different life. It's just a matter of what they see in it and what they feel about it, and hopefully they don't get bored with it. Jeffrey Archer has some very good pictures of mine that he bought a long time ago. Yeah, I'm always pleased, but I'm just as pleased when a bloke next door buys one. It doesn't matter the guy or the person.
How do you feel when you see them hanging in people's homes?
I like to see that very much because they've taken on a different life. Even to see them hung in a different gallery, like when you go into a gallery, we have, like in my gallery here, obviously we have total control, can put everything where we want and how we want. Because often the relationship of one painting to the others next to it is very important. So if you go into somebody's private house to see how it is there, it's really good. And often I like people to send me photos of the painting in situation. And I would still say to anybody that, you know, you've all got some pictures on the wall, some that you love, some you hardly glance at. The ones that you hardly glance at, give them the flick and get something new.
I think of all the international travellers who've come to Australia literally because of your iconography. Why do you think your style has remained so evergreen and speaks to so many people?
Mate, that's very flattering things that you say. I like to make paintings to give people pleasure. And look, if you wake up and live in Sydney, I mean, it's just one of the most fantastic cities in the world, or if you live in Australia, it's fantastic. But I like to make paintings to give people pleasure. I don't want to do paintings to scare people. I don't want to shock people. I like to try and make things beautiful, or as beautiful as I can make them.
Let's move on to your second food memory. Ham sandwiches swapped with cane cutters for treacle.
I lived in a little country town called Maclean on the Clarence River. It's a wonderful town, and it's where I spent my boyhood, and I think wherever you spend your boyhood or your childhood is very, very influential. It's a big, khaki river flowing quite swiftly. One in flood. When it floods fairly regularly, and as little kids we thought floods absolutely the greatest thing. I once saw a dunny floating down the middle of the Clarence River we were standing there with a mate. We were both about 6. We thought in our entire life we will never see anything as funny as that. So what they have in Maclean or around Maclean is lots of cane fields, lots of cane cutters. And my parents knew a cane cutter, and he invited me to come out one morning to where they were having their breakfast after, because they start to cut cane very, very early. So to do that, I had to ride my bike, get on the little ferry at Maclean, take it across to the other side, and ride this old dusty road eventually to this sort of hut where the cane cutters all sat. Now, my mother had prepared me some little tiny ham sandwiches, you know, little white bread and ham cut into little triangles, very delicate, very beautiful. So I had that ready for my lunch. But when I arrived down there, they were having their lunch, which was giant pieces of bread. Giant pieces of bread, absolutely saturated in treacle or in golden syrup, pouring off the sides of it. And they took one look at my little wimpy but delicious ham sandwiches and made me a deal that I found irresistible, that they would swap me one of their giant treacle confections, constructions, for my little ham sandwiches. I thought I got the better end of the deal, really, because they were absolutely delicious. It's a shame you can't go into the Ritz or into the Savoy and ask for some big treacle sandwiches.
We can recreate that one for you and send it across. Mum's cooking. What do you remember about that?
What I remember most about our kitchen, we didn't have a refrigerator. We had a meat safe. And my father had a truck, and she used to leave very early in the morning. And when I would get up, just outside my window was a grapevine, black grapes, absolutely delicious. Anyway, you walk into the kitchen and you'd be confronted by a very large piece of wood, because we had a stove, a fuel stove, and my mother would put one end of the wood into the fuel stove and balance the other on a chair. And so as it burnt down, you just need to push the chair a little bit closer to the fire itself. And it was such a big day when we got our first refrigerator, and we had a little the laundry outside had a dirt floor, and so I can always remember the smell of hot sudsy water being poured out of the copper onto the dirt. Oh, kids don't. They don't appreciate that. They don't have that experience.
Was it a big day every time a new modern appliance came into the Doan house?
It was. Well, we didn't have too many new ones because, it was still the time of the dunny man. The guy
Yes.
ran down the side of the house with a big black can of crap, balanced hopefully most of the time on his shoulder. And the dunny itself was like 30 yards or 20 metres or something down at the back. And I was doing a talk the other day up in Maclean, and somebody was asking about the local newspaper, and it was called the Maclean Examiner, and its rival was the Grafton Advocate. I think I got those names right. And as a kid, we used to roll them up and smoke them, and the Maclean Examiner, you could have about 2 puffs before the flame got, dangerously close to their lips. But the Grafton Advocate, it must have been heavier paper. You get maybe 3 puffs out of that. Yeah, this is good boyhood stuff.
This is great. When you speak of this time as this part of your childhood or the growing up as a Huckleberry Finn style childhood.
Yeah.
What would you like to bring back from that time?
Well, I'd like to bring back my age, but no, look, it was a Huckleberry Finn out. No shoes to school, fishing before school, fishing after school, mucking around. Radio was important. And radio in those days, it came out of a big, about the size of a small refrigerator, the radio, but it was warm, because there's valves. In our little house, I could sit beside it and feel the warmth coming through the wood. Listen to the Argonauts. It's an old ABC program for kids in those days. The Argonauts was great.
I think of that time and I think of the radio. You were actually able to do other things. You were able to cook, clean.
If you could.
Paint. Well, actually, let's talk about painting. When did you actually notice, hang, I'm onto something here?
That's a very good line. I'm onto something here. Well, my mum would say that it was always easier for me to make a drawing about something that, had I gone to some birthday party and she'd ask me, was it any good, what happened? And I would make a drawing of what happened. So I was always using it as a means of communication. Look, but all kids, I think, do that. But there's something, I don't know, when you're kind of 11 or 12, some kids keep drawing and other kids, give up. But, as I was 5 years in the art school, and then I worked in America, I worked in London. I had a fantastic time in the advertising business because I had really good accounts that I could travel lots of parts of the world. I was good at it. I won quite a few awards, but I was approaching my 40th birthday and I thought, I don't really want to do this anymore. Judy and I were on holidays in Vanuatu, and on a Sunday night with the late Peter Brock, very nice boy. And he was talking to me about motor racing and how passionate he was about motor racing, which I imagine would be a very passionate thing to be about. I realized I was good at advertising, but I wasn't passionate about it. I was passionate about art. So we flew back to Sydney. I walked into the office Monday morning, went to the chairman's office, and I resigned. Because if you were going to do it, you had to give it 100%. You had to give it 100%.
So we're talking the 80s now, aren't we?
Yeah, we're talking, late 70s, because it was 1980 when I had my very first exhibition on my 40th birthday. No one knew anything about me before then.
So you mark your 40th birthday with your first exhibition. Where was it?
Well, I wanted to have an exhibition, and I wanted to have it in a big commercial gallery. Even in the back of my mind, I always knew that I wanted to open my own gallery. So the Holdsworth Gallery, run by a wonderful lady, Gisela Scheinberg, in those days. I went to see her, and I showed her some pictures, and I said, really, you should come to my studio to see the work itself. So kindly, she arrived one day in her chauffeur-driven car, had a little studio in North Sydney. I showed her the work. She offered me the exhibition to share it with two other painters. One was a sculptor, one was one of the Boyds, not Arthur, I can't think of his other name now, and a very decorative Melbourne painter called Greg Irvine. So it was me in the middle room and then these other two. About 2/3 of the paintings sold. I mean, I've had more than 100 exhibitions now, but your first one, you're very nervous. But it's only in time you realise that your first exhibition, the people that buy it's going to be, the bloke next door, the guy who runs the gallery, your garage, the butcher. Like, it's your friends who will buy things on the first exhibition.
They'll come to your first show.
That's right. They'll say all the right things.
Come to your restaurant.
So the major painting, it was a painting about the size of this table. It's like about 2 meters. And it was called Long View from the Cabin. And it was literally the long view of my studio in Chinaman's Beach. And no one bought it. And about a couple of days after the exhibition, I got a call from Aaron Kaplan, nice bloke, dead now unfortunately, who used to run Billy Blue, a magazine that reached architects, designers, artists in those days. Anyway, it was $1,500. He offered me $1,000 for it. Well, I needed it. So I sold it to him for $1,000. Now, we were able to buy it back for $30,000 about 10 years after that. And so I've kept that. Obviously, we won't sell it again. So, yeah, each exhibition, it's always, look, got a couple of exhibitions. It's always very exciting. You love it when people buy things. You like to be able to talk to people about paintings. There are some artists who want nothing to do with the public. I think that they're essentially up themselves because art, it's a form of communication. And if you need to spend more time explaining it, well, I think you're obliged to do that. And, 99.9% of my paintings hopefully elicit some kind of positive response because that's what they set out to be. They set out to be beautiful. When I was a young art student, you didn't even see like pink and orange. You didn't see that together. You wouldn't see blue and green. They even have a little poem, blue and green shouldn't be seen. What a load of crap. Of course it should be seen. Blue and green, it's the trees in the sky. So people's attitude to colour changed dramatically.
You said something a little earlier about, I needed that $1,000, so I was happy to discount my work. That to an emerging artist, to an artist, whether they be a painter, sculptor, photographer, a dancer, whatever, I want to get your thoughts on commercialism and how important that is as a concept to producing fabulous art. So when I sit next to, because there are a lot of critics who will come down on anyone that says you can't put a price on these works. Well, if we don't put a price on these artworks, these artists can't afford to make them. They can't afford to live. What did you champion in the space of properly pricing work?
Well, it's a funny thing, isn't it, when people would say sometimes, that's too commercial. What do you mean? Do you mean lots of people liked it? Is that what you mean by that?
People paying money for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Too many people went to see the movie, so therefore it can't be good. Rubbish. My work was always commercial. I always wanted to sell it. And the temptation is, and this is true for most artists, they will repeat something that's working. Even Sidney Nolan, even John Coburn, a wonderful painter. Towards the end of their life, they will keep repeating themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Ray Charles, one of my great heroes, Ray Charles could sing the songbook and bring something to it. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think within yourself, you know that you need to challenge yourself. Like, I've been working on a big painting. I was going to call it number 8 because there's 7 crappy paintings underneath it, or 7 paintings that I wasn't really happy with. So the most important thing is to paint over it and go again. So you have to drive yourself, first of all. If you don't like it yourself, in our situation, my big studio is at home. I bring the painting up, I put it on the wall. Judy and I, we're lying on different lounges, we're watching television, but the painting is on my right-hand wall, close to me. So even though I'm watching the television, I'm seeing it out of the corner of my eye. Almost inevitably, like we would be watching Midsummer Murders. We'll both fall asleep. And I wake up and I'd say, who did it? And Judy would say, well, I don't know, I went to sleep as well. But if there's something bothering me about the painting on that wall, even though it might be, Saturday night in the middle of the night, I'll pick it up, take it back to the studio and work on it. So until I'm happy with it, they don't leave the house. Once they leave the house, it says that's the journey. That's the journey.
But money for you has been a resource, and in your world, you've always moved it. It's never stagnant. It's always supported lots of causes. It's done a lot of stuff. You've done stuff with money.
I've been involved with UNICEF for a very long time. You think about the terrifying things that happen to children around the world. I certainly feel an obligation to try and do some tiny thing, because it is tiny compared to the size of the problem. Yeah, I think, I'm not worrying where my next food is coming from. For me, the great success that money buys me the opportunity to walk into an art studio and have whatever I want. I can buy whatever material I like. So that's a difference from when I was a young art student and you'd, save up but nowadays that's past that. And you have 83. I'm not here forever. I've probably only got about another 25 years to go.
Well, here's hoping, says your team. Your next memory is about Judy. But before we get to that, you've been married to Judy for 50 years.
Well, it's getting on for 60 years.
60 years. How do you keep the summer phase of this relationship warm and bright?
That's a very good question, but a hard question. Family is very important to us. Look, Judy and I have a great shared visual understanding of things. She's one of the very few people, she and my daughter, my son to a degree, but that I actually listen to if I'm talking to them about art, or now my granddaughter, I'll take her opinion. In the end, I'll make up my own mind, but, you've got to listen to a few people. So we've had that shared experience. She's a terrific cook. I'm not. So that's always a delight to be sitting down to have a meal with her. We've travelled extensively, which has been a very good use of money, I think. You got to accept, I think, that the first flush of romance, like I met Judy when she was about, 17 or 18.
How old were you?
I was, I think, 21. I was 21, Judy was, I think, 18. And yeah, I thought she was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. We fell in love, as you do at that age. And, those first passionate times, you can't sustain that. But, we're still here.
Your third food memory is green jelly. I'm reading this directly from your email. Green jelly prepared in a way that only Judy Doan understands! !
I've had the experience of dining in some of the great, great restaurants of the world, in America, in New York, and in France, and in London. And as I said before, Judy is a very, very good cook. But often, I like to have green jelly that hasn't been totally dissolved, so that the bottom half an inch, I'm still in the old measurements, is kind of solid green rubbery jelly. I like that. I like that very much. You can chew on it for a while. Yeah, green jelly.
What is the technique? Is she putting
Well,
less
I don't
sugar?
know. I don't know. I know,
You're
I know
not the cook.
nothing. I know nothing about cooking, but I think it's got something to do is that at some point in time she doesn't dissolve all of the crystals. The top half is soft and slides down your throat. The bottom half is chewable.
In 1989, you were awarded Father of the Year. Now a grandfather, I often ask this question of my own father: how has grandparenting given you a second whack at parenting?
Look, I'm crazy about my grandkids, and now we have a baby in the family. My grandkids range from 15, 13, 10, and 9 months. And my grandson, Marlon, used to call me Fun Dad when he couldn't pronounce Granddad. So Fun Dad was quite good. In fact, I wish I'd be quite happy to be called Fun Dad all the time.
Are you reminded of your own grandparents?
I was very close to my mother's mother. Although on my other side, my old grandmother there, she always said to me, "Don't neglect your drawing." And that's, for an artist, that is a very, very good line. Don't neglect your drawing. You've always got to do that. Oh, gosh, I want to be here for a long time because I want to watch them grow up. I think that, when your life's over, you just, you may as well just get, put in a cardboard tube and thrown away. I don't have the comfort of believing that, suddenly I'll go to a glorious place and I'll meet everybody that was with me before. I'd like to believe in that. I think it's a very nice thought, but I'm not there yet.
Your social cause now, Ken.
I've been the official UNICEF ambassador for, more than 30 years.
So your role as ambassador, you were campaigning for children's rights across the world. How did this come to be? How did this connection come together?
That's a good question. I was doing the outside of the Australian pavilion in Expo for Ken Woolley. There was a big Australian pavilion, and I designed the word Australia to go outside the pavilion itself. And I was halfway through working all that out, and 2 guys came to the studio to see me one day. They said they're from UNICEF, they're a couple of Canadian blokes. And they said, "Look, UNICEF is also going to have a pavilion up there. Will you design the outside of that?" "Oh, yeah, of course." Without thinking, because you already have in your mind, I think, a very clear idea that UNICEF's a good thing to do. So I did that. And then that led to me, I was approached to say, would I become the official UNICEF ambassador? Well, of course, I'd be delighted to do it. And it led me into all kinds of, or Judy and I, and the kids, sometimes Camilla, into various trips, East Timor, Africa, and then spending a bit of time with Audrey Hepburn, who is such a strong presence for UNICEF and such a wonderful girl. But a terrible smoker. Like, when no, seriously. Her boyfriend, Robert Walters, when she was here in Sydney, she was making a speech up at the, I think the old Intercontinental. He would be waiting beside the lectern with a lit cigarette so that the minute Audrey stopped speaking, she would start smoking. she was absolutely, totally addicted to it, which is a great tragedy. But nothing can take away from the great work she did for UNICEF over the years. Lovely woman.
What did you achieve in those 35 years? What were some of the highlights?
Well, you can't measure it in that sense of the word. You can't say we saved those children or that person that got
that's
food.
an ongoing thing, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but for instance, in East Timor, where there'd been a terrible amount of destruction for the water systems coming down from there, they'd broken all of those things. So UNICEF fixed up all of that. Or in Africa, where there's been lots of ways of helping build toilets and the basic things of life. And look, I remember once I went to a refugee camp in Africa. There's, 1,000 people there. But UNICEF had organised tents, so they're all in rows. There's doctors there. And these are doctors. God, I remember going to one little outback doctor's place where babies being delivered bits of newspaper. They got absolutely bugger all. So it's the people on the front line that you have a great deal of respect for. And that's what UNICEF continues to bring to it, some kind of structure. At the moment, in the time in which we live, with the amount of devastation that's happening in the Ukraine and in Gaza, one is just, if you spend too much time thinking about it, you'll go crackers, because I don't know what the solution is, but it's got to find some way of making it better.
I'm going to quote you from one of my Gospels, the Gospel according to Wikipedia. You said, "I want to use any means that are necessary to communicate to people what I feel about things. You're almost 84. There's still a fair bit of paint on your brush. What do you have left to share with us, Ken?"
Well, hopefully more good paintings and hopefully more confident things. Looking at this table that we happen to be sitting around now, I can find, because this is paint over time, stained into this wood, and I'm realizing how beautiful it is. So I hope it's just about reminding people to keep their eyes open and to look at things. Sometimes simple things, sometimes complicated things, but to use your eyes to get something of the joy of being alive.
I'm going to be as bold as your brushstrokes now to express the warm feels of everyone in the world whose life you've drenched in colour. Ken Doan, thank you for everything.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of 3 Food Memories. 3 Food Memories is produced and edited by Lauren McWhirter with music by Russell Torrance. Don't forget to keep an eye on the website 3foodmemories.com and at 3 Food Memories on all the socials to keep up to date with all things plated 3 Food Memories. Bye for now and ora kali.
Thank you for listening to Papa's podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends. Bye.